Hello, and welcome to Schneider Electric's podcast for everyday extraordinary healthcare. As has been widely reported, cyber attacks, including attacks on healthcare systems, have risen alarmingly due to the pandemic crisis. This has revealed the tendency among cyber criminals to strike when institutions and individuals are at their most vulnerable. Data shows a direct correlation between the pandemic milestones and rates of cybercrime. The Computer World reported, for example, that cyber attacks rose 48% on January 30th of this year, the day the US announced its first case of COVID-19. With us today, we're going to speak with Nasser Mund, who's the Security Director Commercial for Global Cybersecurity Services within Schneider, for his perspective on what hospitals and what organizations can do. Welcome, Nasser.
Thank you, Chris.
So we just heard there from Computer World around the cyber attacks, increasing when the pandemic happened. What have you been seeing in the market this year?
We've seen a similar trend across all industries that as the pandemic started and as people had to work more remotely, as more and more people had to connect into systems, we saw the incidence of cyber attacks increasing tremendously. And this has happened across several industries, almost all of them.
Yeah, and we saw one recently, I think it was in Germany, where someone connected to a health system and it actually impacted a lot of the medical devices inside that organization. Is that something which is you see commonly?
We have to look at the perspective right now. As technology has moved forward, there's more and more reliance on data. Things have been connected, and with this connectivity, all the data that was stored into devices, because the devices were becoming intelligent, has started moving from one place to the other, and data has been used as the information based on which decisions are made, and they are made much faster when the connectivity is there. So the more you expand that transition of data, you expand your attack surface.
Yeah, so
And
when we look at digitization and we think, okay, we want to have these open connected systems, and it actually poses a risk for an organization.
yeah, and you would have heard the maxim that the technology that helps us do things faster also increases our risk as well. So the more we get into using data to make our decisions, the more we connect things, the more we start moving things around, the attack surface, as I explained, it increases. And when your attack surface increases, of course, people are waiting there to make money out of that as well. So yes, we have to be very careful. And with the pandemic, what has happened is there has been an increase in need for people to connect remotely. So you have opened another avenue for that data to flow. And again, that's another attack surface that people can go in there and attack.
So what can organizations, and particularly healthcare facilities, what can they do to kind of warn off these types of attacks?
First, they need to be cognizant of the fact that your attack surface is increased. Okay. The realization is the first thing. Then they need to put systems in place to ensure that that data is protected, both from an IT perspective, and a lot of that data now is coming out from their OT systems. So if they need people to connect remotely, those people need to connect to the OT systems as well, whether it be the electrical system based on the connectivity. So from a cybersecurity perspective, we have a solution that provides you a very secure remote access into your OT assets. So any operator, any remote operator that needs to connect to an OT device can go through the system digitally as if that person was physically walking into a hospital with an ID card, getting into the hospital, getting into the secure area, and actually working on that OT asset. We can replicate that digitally with a very secure remote access solution that provides the operators the ability to enter into the hospital remotely with secure credentials, get to the specific OT asset that they want to work on, whether it be a building management system, to go in there and work on it, get the actual permit digitally to work on it. So those are the type of solutions that hospitals need to look at. The hospitals need to look at to ensure that not only are they secure from an IT perspective, but that they are securing their OT assets as well. Because as you would have seen, the American Society of Healthcare Engineering has also pointed out very clearly that your building systems, your OT assets could be potential cyber penetration point. And we've seen that happen in other industries as well. People term industries as critical infrastructure, etc. But within hospitals, certain elements are absolutely critical, because now you're talking not only about financial repercussions of a cyber attack, but even the actual safety implications of it, because you are dealing with people's lives here. So healthcare is very, very critical infrastructure within a micro sense as well.
Interesting. So really, the OT technology, because it's digitizing it, as you mentioned, it's creating a bigger footprint for people to connect to. So when we think of customers, what services do we provide from Schneider Electric?
So, from a Schneider Electric perspective, we can actually go into a hospital. Of course, besides all the digitization of their actual controls, we can provide them on three levels. We can provide them products that are secure by design, that are designed based on how the standards specify them, following the secure development lifecycle. So we ensure that the products that are going into those places are secure by design. They have embedded cybersecurity in them. We then help through our own execution centers or through our partners ensure that those products are integrated into a system. When that system then goes in and sits in our customers' infrastructure in their network, where they connect to different things, whether for example, our BMS system goes in there, sits in the larger network of that hospital network, connects to different things where information is coming into them, we can help them go and see if that entire network is secure. We can help them assess their network to see where they stand, what are the assets that are communicating on that network, and what's the integrity of that communication, how secure is that network. Based on that assessment, we can then go in and design a system for them that covers their basic elements of cybersecurity. They need to make sure they have proper authentication and identification before people get in there. That authentication needs to be accountable too. They need to make sure that they have an endpoint protection system, an anti-malware in there that ensures that no outside malwares are entering them. They need to make sure that all their OT assets are patched properly. They need to ensure that their networks are segmented. Chris, with cybersecurity, it's not a matter of if you're going to get attacked. It's more the mentality should be when they are going to be attacked. So they need to segment their networks. They need to separate it out that when they are attacked, they can contain that attack to a certain zone and be able to clean it up. And last but not least, in systems like these, it's absolutely essential from a business continuity, from an operations continuity perspective, to have a very, very rigid backup system so that when something does happen, they're up and running instantaneously.
So it's preparedness. It's been ready for when this incident will happen. And I guess, because we're a manufacturer, our systems will be targeted quite often. What do we do to ensure that we notify our customers if we do find vulnerabilities in our offer?
So we have a very robust system. We have a product security office that is specific to ensure, one, that our products are secure, and two, to be able to inform to inform all our customer once we find vulnerabilities within our system. And last but not least, have a very robust incident response system that if these were found, come up with remedies. How do you remediate based on the vulnerabilities that have been discovered? So we have a dedicated department called Product Security Office that focuses just on that.
Excellent. So thinking of resiliency, cybersecurity is about planning and being prepared, and making sure that, when we do have an incident, it's about containment of that penetration.
Absolutely. You need to have a plan. Think of this plan as a safety evacuation plan. You don't say if a fire, when the fire would happen, this is what we are going to do. This is our execution, this is our evacuation plan. This is our, meeting point. This is what happens. So that needs to be in place for a cyber attack as well. It is as critical as safety, not more, because now it has safety repercussions.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, Nassar, thank you for joining us today. Very insightful.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Chris. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Our final segment of today's program is our country spotlight. And today we have Anna Salmaron, who's the Building Segment Director for South America, joining us. So Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here participating on this podcast.
Fantastic. So obviously, much has changed in 2020, especially in healthcare, which is one of your focus segments. But can you give us a little bit of an overview as to what's been happening in South America, and then some of the actions some of the different countries have been taking?
For sure. Well, first of all, it's a great opportunity to be here and bring a South American overview of what have been happening here and how we have been responding to the challenges this year because of the pandemic of COVID. And before I start talking about what is going on around here, it's very important to say that when we talk about South America, we are talking about many different countries with different ways to react to the pandemic. And sometimes the impacts have been different from one country to the other because of COVID. So what I would try to bring here is an overview on whatever is common among them, okay? Well, as you probably know, coronavirus started here in February when Brazil confirmed the case in São Paulo. And since then, all governments have been working very hard to protect their citizens and to contain the spread of the disease. But more recently, since July, we have, in Latin America overall, we have become the region with the highest number of confirmed cases. And aside from health risks that we all know, we are already facing a lot of economic impacts around the region, and we will be facing even more, we believe, in the future. And just to give an overview, many countries have recently relaxed some of the restriction actions, such as in Brazil and Chile. But in Argentina, for example, they are still under strict quarantine measures, okay? So while many people started working from home since the beginning of the quarantine, all the facilities teams of our hospitals had to dedicate themselves even more physically present inside the hospitals, and they needed to keep everything safe, available, working in operation. They never stopped working because of the pandemic, and they have been facing a lot of challenges and difficulties. And what we saw around here is that whatever was already approved and ongoing regarding investments in their hospitals, they kept this, generally speaking. But of course, the focus has been totally redirected to make things working, available, because of the huge number of patients that arrived every day at their hospitals. So it's important to remember that one of the things that really we need to consider is that they kept, especially the private hospitals, they kept everything running, even considering the reduction they had on their income because of the cancellation of other treatments from other diseases and the cancellation of surgeries. Well, what we see as common because of the pandemic is that hospitals are today questioning themselves how they can better react and how they can react more quicker to similar health events in the future. How can they improve their resilience in situations similar to the ones we are facing right now? I could say that they really are, they see today that they have many rooms for improvement inside their facilities. And when I say rooms for improvement, I mean from the electrical distribution installations to their building management systems, whether they are integrated or not. Well, what happened is this crisis for sure brought a trend regarding digital transformation in their facilities. And of course, what we see is that we have different levels of maturity of the building management systems in the hospital. So we don't see the same level in all institutions around all countries, but they all noticed they needed to move, and they need to move right now things forward regarding integration of systems, in a better integration of their systems.
And so when the government were looking at, in these different countries, at how they were going to address kind of the surge capacity, did they, in the regions, were they building kind of temporary facilities, or was it more a case of adapting the spaces inside of existing infrastructure?
Most of them had to adapt what they had regarding access control, for example, for some areas inside their hospitals. Depending on the size of the hospitals, the situation was different. And what we saw is we saw some hospitals keeping their investments on new areas they already had planned to build. So they kept this specifically in some countries. But what we saw is, in general, all the redirection of the focus on keeping things working because of the COVID patients arriving at their doors in general. Okay, so basically what we saw is they had to keep all the facilities teams available around the clock, because the same way as the medical staff, as if they were frontline, okay? And they had to react because of their many buildings. For example, we have hospitals here in South America where we are talking of hospitals in the middle of the cities that grow inside, around the block of one main hospital. So it means they had to adapt the entrances and exits of COVID and no COVID patients. And of course, this was different depending on the size, of course, as I said, of the institutions. And of course, regarding the fact that they were private or public, because they had to do some adaptations. And if they were private, they could decide by themselves. If they were public, they had really to face the bureaucracy that we always have on this kind of cases. And sometimes the systems they had were not mature enough. They felt the need to do additional investments. One of the things that they saw happening, and this is something that was really present even before the pandemic, was regarding cyber attack. But what happened? Because of the pandemic, of course, much more data became to be accessed through internet, both by patients and also by suppliers. And the risk of a cyber attack even increased.
The increase in the cyber attack, was this because of the need to open up their systems so that facility teams could work remotely? Was it a case of so that they could share more data and have integrated systems? What's driven that kind of cybersecurity attacks in the region?
Basically, it was exactly the amount of data that became to be accessed remotely by the hospital's teams. Some of them, administrative functions, started to work remotely. And of course, patients started to really access all their personal data and their remote consultations. And so this increased the level of data exchanged through internet. What we saw is that, in fact, we had some examples of cyber attacks happened this year, especially in Brazil. And some big hospitals have been facing this problem this year. And what we see is that today, as we see our customers, IT and OT teams, they realize that they need to work better together. They are much more aware that they need to join efforts instead of really accepting that they have separated systems, each area, and somehow these systems are not necessarily integrated in a good way, and this for somehow it opens some space and increase the risk of cyber attacks. So basically what we have been doing together with them is we are trying to help them by building bridges, between them, because somehow they work separately, and we have been working together with the two teams to bring them, to make them understand how to define how to protect their institutions better. One of the examples that we did recently is we have organized a workshop with many customers in Brazil, and we presented cybersecurity as one of the main topics. Although remote operations have been present, as I said, before the pandemic in some areas, the demand for that has increased during the crisis. And now what we see is the customers started to be much more, let's say, paying attention to this kind of situations, to this kind of problems. And we see them much more aware of what needs to be done. So at this point, what we are doing is putting these teams to work together and supporting them, and using our teams, our key account teams, our cybersecurity teams to support them, evaluating how they can protect their hospitals better.
So in an effort to protect the facility workers, there was a shift towards more remote types of facilities, but that's opened up a cybersecurity weakness in their infrastructure. So it's a good example of how resiliency needs to be thought across, not just around power distribution, but across all of the IT networks as well.
Exactly. So many of these remote operations, they will be kept after whenever this will be, the end of this will be, many of these remote operations will be kept after the pandemic, not only for all type of business, but for healthcare institutions as well. So everyone learned a lot during this pandemic and changed the way they work and the way we react to some activities in our daily life, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we will definitely see how that changes. Our own working day-to-day has changed drastically this year, so it will change certainly. And you mentioned resiliency in terms of the infrastructure. So obviously you've been looking at cybersecurity as an area where there may be a weakness in some facilities. But what other types of resilience issues have you noticed in healthcare facilities?
Well, today, recently this year, either because of the pandemic or not, we believe that the pandemic may have brought light to some other problems that hospitals have here in the region. And specifically in Brazil, we have had several cases of fire in hospitals. And we don't know if this has relation with the pandemic or not. But anyway, we can say that the institutions have been working around the clock, right? And we saw many reasons for these incidents. Mainly, they were related to electrical installations failures. And there has not been a very, let's say, a root cause analysis of every incident we saw. But what we see is we found hospitals with electrical installations that were not exactly suitable to the standards we need to have here in the country. And we see that they may not have paid the necessary attention to the project, to the engineer phase, while planning their electrical installations. Another reason is that today we see that hospitals have a lot of difficulty to find professionals with experience in hospital facilities and infrastructures to work with them. Just an example of this is we have one big hospital in Brazil who also is the leader of one big university. And they even created a specific training, a course, where they are, let's say, trying to exactly improve the specialization of this kind of professionals so that they can create these professionals for the market and for them as well. Of course, in the end of the day, they want these professionals to work for them. They are a hospital and a university. And what we have been doing is trying to help them evaluate their electrical installations in general. And we sometimes find very old electrical installations. And some of them, as I said, not exactly built according to local standards. And what is more, let's say, sometimes makes us worry a little bit more is that there are not exactly suitable maintenance procedures established and in place, depending on the hospital, of course. The bigger the hospital, the more organized the private hospitals, the more organized they are, the more their staff is prepared, and of course, the more procedures they have regarding maintenance in general. But mainly this difficulty they have regarding the professionals is something that is really something that they are really worried about and they are trying to solve. Regarding the installations in general, the electrical installations, we as Schneider Electric, of course, this is in our DNA. And what we have been doing is we are, for greenfields, for example, we are putting together these multidisciplinary teams of engineering companies, panel builders, and the end users from hospitals to discuss and to build, even sometimes with the help of some consultation companies, to really build the project right from the beginning. This is very important. And this for sure brings more safety, and if everything is built and planned and designed according to standards and according to the best-in-class solutions that we, of course, have. We are also discussing the topic of the quality of the electrical installations more with our hospital customers, with end users. And more, they are more, let's say, interested on discussing this kind of things.
Fascinating. Well, thank you, Anna. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, Chris. It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of Schneider Electric's podcast for everyday extraordinary healthcare. Join us in the coming weeks as we will explore additional aspects of driving resiliency in healthcare, such as asset management and flexible buildings.